ladies and gentlemen, I'm very happy to be there today to present you the result of a work we have done at the Florence School of Regulation and Microeconomics. We have done it for Edison, Asso Electrica, and Federal Utility, and we thank them for giving us the opportunity to present this work to you. We have compared 10 different regimes for granting right to use hydropower in Europe. And in particular, we will see that we show that the diversity of hydropower regimes in Europe, from our point of view, can create distortions on the electricity market. And consequently, it would be beneficial that these regimes be harmonized to some extent. So my presentation is organized as follows. First, I will give you the context of this study and its objective. Then I will present you the results of our benchmarking of hydropower regimes in Europe, including the distortions from the diversity. And last, I will conclude on these results and their consequences. So first, the context and objectives of the study. Well, hydropower is a prominent energy source for different reasons, for different characteristics. This is because first, it is an affordable energy source with a levelized cost often between 50 and 100 euro, which is in the same range of any other energy types, whether renewable or not. Furthermore, hydropower, hydro storage with or without pumping provides flexibility to the electricity system. This is all the more useful to the system if intermittent generation such as wind or photovoltaic power develops. And hydropower has also the advantage of being a technology that does not emit CO2 producing electricity, which is with also an important development potential, since only 30% of the hydropower potential is currently exploited in Europe. Meanwhile, hydropower is a generation technology which has a considerable impact on its local environment. It can impact other water or land uses, tourism, agriculture, aquaculture, etc., because it can flood some areas when when they are built with reservoir. It can also impact wildlife, even remote aquatic life, changing water course, water temperature, or an oxygen concentration from the stagnation in reservoirs. It can also produce greenhouse gases from the decomposition of specific flooded land. Excuse me, I forget animations. But the environmental impact of hydropower can be minimized with appropriate choice of site for hydropower plant and some investment obligation, such as fleece laders or aerating turbines, etc., in order to minimize the environmental impact. So that is why there is a need of an environmental impact assessment for hydropower plant, and it also explains that there is a need for public control to balance the benefits of hydropower for the entire power system against its potential negative effects on the environment. Excuse me. Understanding and grasping the main differences between the national or regional hydropower regimes throughout Europe is of particular interest for several reasons that are the main objectives of this study. First, research on hydropower regimes from our knowledge and unknown territories. There exists no study of diversity of hydro regimes in Europe and the possible distortions on the electricity market. Besides, from a practical point of view, you will see that it is interesting to question the seemingly amazing drivers of the actions by the European Commission with regard to hydropower regimes. So, before going further, I'd like to ask you what is your knowledge of hydropower regimes in your country, because from our point of view, it's rather some new topic in the field of the energy policy. So I propose you a poll with this regard. So you have two possible answers. Whether you have a rather limited knowledge or rather a detailed knowledge of hydropower regimes in your country. So I let you some time to answer to the poll. There is now 2/3 of the people that have answered it. Let you some time now. 80%. I will close it in, let's say, 5 seconds. So there's no more votes. So with more than 90% of people answering to the questions, it's rather balanced, because we have almost 50-50 between people knowing hydropower regimes in their countries and people that don't know it, people that have a limited knowledge, and others that have detailed knowledge. So this I think it will be very interesting to see it in the Q&A session, and for you to question and to also to have a better knowledge of hydropower regimes in your country and also in other countries. So, and now if we enter in the results of our benchmarking, they are as follow. Our main result is the huge institutional and contractual heterogeneity that surrounds hydropower regimes. And not surprisingly, subsidiarity has produced heterogeneity at the national level, more surprisingly at the regional or local level. We could see it with different legislative frameworks and decision-making processes for granting right to use hydropower. We also observe heterogeneity in the regulatory arrangements and contractual terms that may be different from one country to another, with different duties imposed on the hydropower operators, different rules, different duration of rights, different provisions for environmental protections, and different investment obligation. We can illustrate that with different maps. So on this first map, we can see that the local or regional authorities can play a large role in the decision-making process to grant hydropower right, for instance, in Portugal, Germany, Sweden, Switzerland, or Italy. So the dark green colored country, where the local authorities have decision-making power, whatever the size of the plant. In Austria, in France, or in Spain, so the light green colored country, the local authorities have decision-making power for the smallest power plants with different results depending on the countries. And this situation will increase the heterogeneity coming from the national level, because you may have different interpretation on the national legislation and further heterogeneity from the local level. So now if we look at another feature of hydropower regimes, it's the obligation attached to hydropower rights, and they may be different from one country to another. For instance, you will have countries asking for an environmental impact assessment everywhere and whatever the size of the power plant. So they are illustrated with the green countries, and in particular it's the case for Sweden or Portugal, where you have no threshold for the size of the power plant for implementing an environmental impact assessment. Whereas in other countries, you have a threshold of capacity for an environmental impact assessment. And even for other countries, they ask an assessment only in sensitive areas. So that's the case for the blue card countries in France, Spain, or Great Britain. And the obligations of residual water flow, so the part of water flow that the hydropower cannot stop, let's say, varies a lot from one country to another, from non-zero but not specified value in Germany to around 15% in France. So, put simply, constraints on hydropower plants for operator are very heterogeneous from one country to another. There are also different forms of rights, or authorization, concession, license, permits. So we can see the different the countries choosing the different types of rights on this map. And even for a given country, for instance, in France or in Norway, you can have different type of rights that are used depending on the size of the power plant. And you can have also a different duration of rights to use hydropower. Let's say from 15 years to 80 years in some countries, and either for unlimited time. So for instance, in the red colored country, in Sweden, Norway for public company, and 2 in Great Britain for licenses that are granted before 2003. This means that the time to recover investment in hydropower plant varies a lot from one country to another, and this is another source of heterogeneity for investor and operator. At last, another characteristics of institutional and regulatory framework of hydropower regime is the openness of competition to grant right to use hydropower, and that differs considerably also from one country to another. One can see here on this map 3 groups of country: the blue colored country, France, Spain, and Italy, that have implemented a competition process for attribution or renewal of rights. Switzerland and Portugal, they are colored in green, implement competitive process for attribution only and not for the renewal. And you have no competition process implemented yet in the other countries in yellow, in Norway, Sweden, Germany, and Austria. After this illustration, more surprisingly that heterogeneity at the national level, we also note heterogeneity at the European level. So we observe a lack of consistency and non-coordinated actions of the different EU policy bodies, DG Market, DG Competition, and DG Environment. And it's also remarkable that DG Energy has never do any work on this topic until now. So indeed, when we look at the the decisions by the European Commission, it's quite amazing. So it's what is illustrated with this table. So the red colored dot in this table indicate concerns about competition for accessing hydropower rights, either because they are granting for a too long period of time, so with the column duration, or because no competition process is implemented for granting them or for renewing them. Well, when we look at this evaluation of granting process and the current competition infringement opened by the European Commission, it's quite amazing because the European Commission has reopened an infringement procedure against Italy because there was a delay in opening the hydropower market. But there is already a willingness to open this market with a quite short duration for this kind of rights. But other countries like Austria, Germany, or Sweden have not been concerned by any procedure for competitive infringement, whereas we see with the dots that there is some concern with this regard in these countries. So the actions of the European Commission with this regard currently is quite amazing. More generally, the actions of the different European Director General are not coordinated. So this map exemplified the infringement procedure about hydropower regimes and the lack of coordination of the different Directorate General. So the different colors indicate the infringement procedures opened by the different Directorate General. So light blue, it's infringement procedure opened by the DG Competition. Darker blue, it's for infringement procedure opened by the DG Market, and yellow is for infringement procedure opened by DG Environment. And we see that the DG Competition has targeted Portugal for state aid very recently with an still pending infringement procedure, but the DG Market does not investigate the openness of competition for renewal of rights. So that's quite amazing that one DG open an infringement procedure and another has not done anything, whereas it could have done. Or we also see that the DG Environment opens an infringement procedure in Austria, so that the water directive is respected, but the DG Market does not investigate the openness of competition for renewal of rights, whereas we have seen that there is some competition concerns with this regard. So we can notice then a lack of common regulatory backgrounds at the European level for hydropower, and this explains why we have such a diversity even at the national level, because the European level have never sized this topic in order to make a European playing field with this regard for hydropower regimes. So the problem with heterogeneity is that it can create distortion. One country can provide better or worse conditions for investment in use of hydropower, more or less investment or environmental obligation, shorter or longer duration of rights and duration for recovering your investments, different taxation level, different compensation at the end of hydropower rights, more or less open competition process, etc. And it is obvious that this condition will impact investment and use of hydropower. And compared to a situation where the national hydropower regime would be built with a common methodology, heterogeneity distorts the national power equilibrium, the electricity price in each country, and consequently investment in the different countries, and also the electricity flow pattern through the power grid. And considering this effect, well, we can wonder what should be done to harmonize the hydropower regimes? So that's our second poll. So I launched it. So we propose here 3 answers. First, you think that no harmonization is needed. Second, you think that we should harmonize the values characterizing hydropower regimes, so the duration itself of hydropower regimes, the value of residual flow, the specific investment obligation, or only harmonize the methods to set the values, so not the values themselves, but the way they are computed, so for the same characteristics. So I'll let you vote. We have already on 50% of people that have voted. We're now at almost 80%. I'll let you some seconds still. Still last minute voters. So there's no more vote. I close the poll and now share it with you. So most of you think that the methods should be harmonized. That's also what we think, because well, for harmonizing the values, well, it's we have hydropower. It's something that is very local. Its characteristics, the environment. So it's, in our view, is very difficult to have a common value all over Europe. It's very different landscapes, characteristics for land, for the water flows, etc. So that's something that we think is very difficult to implement, to have an harmonization of values. Well, some of you think that no harmonization is needed. Well, that's possible, but we think at least that we should evaluate what is the impact of, more precisely, what is the impact of having non-harmonized hydropower regimes in Europe, and what is the size of the distortions resulting from non-harmonization, in order to see whether some kind of cost benefit of harmonization is positive or negative. So I now come to my conclusion. So the institutional framework related to hydropower is made of a stacking of interest and decision-making power from the European level to the local level, and also going through the national authorities. And the trade-offs are then needed between these different interests to come up with efficient decisions regarding hydropower right of use. And in particular, the consequential liabilities of hydropower operators with regard to their environmental impact should not be neglected, which also explains why an in-depth local or national control is needed to check operators' qualification or transfer of liabilities during renewal. And besides, we have seen that there is an unequal pressure for implementing a competitive process to grant hydropower rights from the European Commission. And there is also a broader question that should at least be raised and treated about the impact of non-harmonized obligations and other characteristics of hydropower regimes. They could be justified by national specificities, but at least it should be the question should be raised, analyzed to know whether it is justified or whether an harmonization to some extent is needed to avoid distortions on the European electricity market. So I thank you for your attention, and your questions and comments are very welcome. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Vincent, for your presentation. It was very interesting. It gave us a very complete overview. Now we go straight to the Q&A session. I will switch your webcam on so that all attendees can see you. I would start with a question, yes, which is more general, I would say, and then I will ask you some questions which are more related to countries. So how could you explain that the European Commission and the EU bodies have not initiated a coordinated action on hydropower regimes?
Well, in fact, what we see is that each DG is using its own set of law, and there was never a European reflection with regard to hydropower regimes. So I think that's the same for any topic in Europe. If there is no question raised, in particular by the DG Energy with this regard, we will never have a common level playing field on this topic. Otherwise, each DG is acting in its own area without looking at what are doing all the other DGs. So that's in fact, there are different interests in the European Commission in the different DGs, and that's why we have this quite amazing landscape. So we have not an harmonized interest at the European level even.
Okay, maybe just to complement on this answer, there was another question from an attendee. Why is it relevant whether hydropower is operated under an authorization, concession, permit, or license? Shouldn't all hydropower plants be tendered following the EU directive on concessions?
Oh, that's a low question. So you should ask it for a lawyer. Well, that's a good question. That's a question we have. So we have looked at this problem from an economic point of view. We think that there are economic consequences with regard to different types of rights. So concession, permits, authorization, etc. So there is possibly an economic impact with this regard, and of course there is possibly also a problem of harmonization with regard the type of right and the new directive about concessions. But there is lots of exemptions. I don't know it very well, but I think there is lots of exemptions in this in this directive. So possibly that's in the range of these exemptions.
Okay, then I've received a couple of questions on specific regions, and in fact, one was just about why you didn't consider the Balkan region in your analysis. I mean, was it due to the difficulty to collect data or information? Because from some producer, it is considered as the new hydro El Dorado.
Well, that's for sure that the accessibility of data is a problem in this kind of study, because you have nothing. You have to look at the national legislation mainly in the local language. But I completely agree with you that we should look at the Balkan area, and our idea was also to look in an area where we have already a quite common marketplace with market coupling. So in this big part of Europe, but that's for sure that in the coming years there is possibly more possibility in the Balkan area than in any other area in Europe.
Okay, then one question which is more general. Why concessions regimes, such as in France, Portugal, Spain, Italy, are the only ones targeted for competition concerns?
That's something that indeed it's quite amazing that only concession regime were targeted by the European Commission. I don't know if there is any reason, any economic reason, but possibly there is a law reason that explain why it's more easy for European Commission to ask for competition in the concession regimes, because, well, even naturally, when we think about concession, we think about period of competitive openness for granting, for attributing the rights or renewing them, whereas in other, when you think about permits or authorization, we think less about this kind of competitive process. So that could be a reason, but once again, I think that that's something that should be investigated also in the area, in the more judicial area.
Okay, then we received a question from Sweden, which is more a comment. So we know that in Sweden, almost 50% of power is produced from hydro. And the question was, there was a minor question on how you define small-scale hydropower in terms of CO2 emissions in your paper. And the second question is, do you think there is a need for opening, in fact, a new market for hydropower, given the potential?
Well, that's something, well, that was not illustrated here, but in our study we'll look also at small-scale hydro and its support, and we have seen also that there is a wide diversity about what is how is a small-scale hydro defined. For some countries, it's power plants of 1 megawatt or even smaller. For other countries, it's when you are around 10 or some tenths of megawatts. You are around you are in the area of small-scale hydro. So there is also a wide diversity, and we don't. It seems it's a national decision, like for any support for renewable energy sources. So, well, that's something that it's still a result from subsidiarity. For opening competition for accessing hydropower, well, that's something we do not. That's a question we do not answer. We know it. From our point of view, it's really an open question, because, well, hydropower, it's a kind of power. Is it really needed that it is open to competition? Because if you cannot access to this kind of power, you can access to other types of generators. So why only for hydropower? And, well, that's for sure. For the other generators, they have a shorter duration of life, whereas for hydropower, you can have a power plant that is, once built, it's there for 100 or several hundred years. So that may be a reason, but from our point of view, there is no still analysis to answer this question. It's an open question. There are some characteristics with regards, for instance, the duration of life of power plants that call for a competitive process, because once you have your power plant and you are accessing a scarce natural resource, that could be good that there is some renewing in the actors accessing this resource. But on the other hand, you have other types of resource, other types of energy accessible for producing electricity.
Okay, great. Then we are really running late with our schedule, but as I see that most of the attendees are still online, I would just ask you one last question, if you agree, Vincent. So the last question is there any link between the overall competition level on electricity, on the electricity market, and the initiation of infringement procedure on hydropower regimes as a way of opening the electricity market?
That's for sure. When we look, when the DG market has opened its infringement procedure in Spain, in Italy, in France, there was some concern in these countries with regard more generally the competition level. And that could have been a way for DG market for opening the market, for forcing to open the market in these countries. But that's not obvious that that's something that was really driving the DG market, but there is at least some correlation between the moment when the DG market opened procedure in these countries and also the sector inquiry and the fact that in these countries at that period of time there was some concern about the competition level. For instance, that's less true now in Italy. That's also less true in Spain. Even if there was not so much renewal in the concessions. So, but that's for sure that may be one reason why DG Market targeted this country and not the other, because there was less concerns about competition in the other countries on the electricity market itself, and not only on the hydropower market.